Well, good morning, everyone. This meeting will come to order. It's a public meeting of the U.S. Futures Commodity Trading Commission. I think it'll be a relatively short meeting. We've got 3 agenda items today. We've got a proposed amendment to our Customer Information and Records Rule. We have 3 Foreign Board of Trade registration applications to decide. And then finally, we have a public charter signing ceremony to celebrate the establishment of the CFTC's first ever Veterans Affinity Group. So I'd like to welcome members of the public, market participants, as well as those of you joining on the phone or watching via webcast. I'd also like to welcome my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Quintens, Commissioner Benham, Commissioner Stump, and Commissioner Berkovitz. As we did during the last 2 public meetings, I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Veterans Day is just around the corner, and today the Commission celebrates the many contributions of veterans to the important work of our agency. As I noted a moment ago, we'll be signing a charter for the newly established Veterans Affinity Group. I'd like to now invite Dustin Hicks to come on up to lead us in the pledge. Dustin? So Dustin is a former sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps. Dustin served in combat in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and he's just one of the more than 50 veterans that serves here at the CFTC. So thank you so much. Everyone, please stand if you'd like to join us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dustin, again for your service in our nation's military as well as here at the CFTC. Thank you. We'll now begin with opening statements. I'll start, followed by my fellow commissioners in order of seniority. We assembled today to consider 2 public policy matters. First, we'll consider an amendment to Commission Regulation 160.30. which requires certain entities to establish policies and procedures for customer records and information. This amendment will formalize the requirements for those policies and procedures consistent with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. The amendment is important for those who trust CFTC-registered entities with their sensitive and confidential information. I want to thank staff in the Division of Swap Dealer and Intermediary Oversight, as well as staff from the offices of the Chief Economist and the General Counsel for their work in preparing the amendment. Second, we'll consider 3 Foreign Board of Trade applications submitted by Euronext Amsterdam, Euronext Paris, and the European Energy Exchange. Foreign Board of Trade registration is important as a matter of comity with our European counterparts. As my fellow commissioners and I said at the last open meeting, comity is a 2-way street. I want to thank staff from the Division of Market Oversight, again from the Office of the Chief Economist and the General Counsel for ensuring that these applications were ready for our deliberations today. And now I'd like to invite my fellow commissioners to make their opening statements, if you have any. Commissioner Quintens?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for calling today's open meeting. I always appreciate the opportunity to deliberate in a public forum with my fellow commissioners and you. We have a number of items before us today, including what you described as the amendments to 160, which I'm glad that we are taking an opportunity to finally correct. And then the 3 action items on Foreign Board of Trade registrations for 3 prominent European futures exchanges. I'll be delivering a statement at the consideration of those that go to really the heart of our cross-border relations with the EU at this moment in time. And I'm just very appreciative and like to recognize the veterans that serve here at the Commission with us, and I'm so glad that we're forming an affinity group to recognize your service. There are a number of you that I know have served. A lot of you I didn't know had served, and it's great to recognize that. And let me just say I'm honored to serve in this capacity with you and recognize your service to our country. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Benham?
Good morning. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, for holding this meeting. I'll be brief. Welcome the opportunity to vote on these 2 important rules today with a number of FBOTs on the second matter. Also, I want to thank you for the charter signing for the Veteran Affairs Group. I want to thank Dustin, and to note that I in my time here, which has been about 2.5 years, I've had 3 interns who are veterans, and they've all been a delight to have in my office and demonstrate really keen intelligence and discipline that I think all the veterans in this agency and throughout the federal government have demonstrated. So thank you for that, and look forward to today's agenda.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Stump?
I don't have a formal statement. I just wanted to note that today is actually 1 year ago since I participated in my first open meeting. I'm a little more settled, a lot more jet lagged, and very, very appreciative for all of the staff. So many of you are here today, so I just wanted to say thank you for all you do. It's been a really great year, a little bit over a year since I arrived, and I want to commend the chairman. We've had a number of changes since I've arrived, but I want to commend the chairman. I think one of his first initiatives was to set up this affinity group for veterans, and I think it was a really great idea. So thank you to Chairman Tarbert for doing that.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all my fellow commissioners for your support on this and many other things that we're doing. Commissioner Berkovitz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you once again for conducting the Commission's business in public. I've noted it before, how I appreciate holding these open meetings to consider the Commission's business, even though the rulemakings that we're considering today, I think, may not rise to the level of controversy or extensive discussion. I still think it's important to do this in public. One thing, when I was here my previous time, we're doing a lot of Dodd-Frank rulemakings. It seemed we were under a blizzard of paperwork and just pouring out reams and reams of words. And then when I was left the commission and I was in private practice, a lot of questions arise, and there wasn't anything. There was a lot that wasn't addressed in those rulemakings. And it just showed me the value of the more the commission can provide guidance, the more the public can have insight into what the commission is thinking, I think the better for the industry. So someday some issue may arise under one of these rules and people will say, well, what were they thinking back then? So I think it really helps to have these discussions in public. I'd also like to note, and I want to thank all my fellow commissioners and the staff of this agency for the hard work, the Office of General Counsel, the Division of Enforcement, and the commissioners for all their hard work in the recent Seventh Circuit case, in the Kraft case, which affirmed in connection with this a very, very important principle that commissioners have a right to speak and their views be made public on matters before the commission. And that's now in a Seventh Circuit opinion, the law of the land, and it's been in the statute, but have the U.S. Court of Appeals affirm our right to speak on matters before the public and have those matters public, I think is critically important. I want to thank everybody in the agency who worked on that case, sometimes at personal peril, to achieve that result, and it affirms the value of public debate and discussion here at the CFTC. So I thank everybody for that, and I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Berkovitz. So for each of the items on today's agenda, I'll introduce the matter that the Commission will be considering. After I introduce an item, I'll share my views, and then I'll invite my fellow commissioners here in public to make any remarks they may have. Following the close of discussion on each matter, then the Commission will vote on the recommendation. All final votes will be conducted in this public meeting will be recorded votes, and the results of the votes approving the issuance of rulemaking documents will be included with those documents in the Federal Register. To facilitate the preparation of approved documents for publication in the Federal Register, I now ask the Commission to grant unanimous consent for staff to make any necessary technical corrections prior to submitting them to the Federal Register.
So moved.
Second.
Without objection, so ordered. So, to begin the Commission's discussion and consideration, I'll now entertain a motion to approve the issuance of the proposed amendment to the Customer Information and Records Rule in Regulation 160.30.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. So at this time, I'll briefly describe the amendment to Regulation 160.30, and I'll share my thoughts about the proposal. So we're proposing an amendment to Section 160.30, which requires certain entities to adopt policies and procedures to safeguard customer information and records. The covered entities include futures commission merchants, commodity trading advisors, commodity pool operators, introducing brokers, and swap dealers. So pretty much all of our registered entities, except for obviously the exchanges and the clearinghouses. Regulation 160.30 provides that covered entities must establish policies and procedures to protect customer records and information with three types of safeguards: administrative, technical, and physical. The amendment fills in the details of those policies and procedures by requiring that they be reasonably designed to accomplish three things. What are those three things? Number one, protect the security and confidentiality of customer records and information. Number two, guard against threats or hazards to customer records and information. And finally, to protect against unauthorized access to or use of customer records or information that could result in substantial harm or inconvenience to customers. So again, this is critical to one of our foundational goals here, which is to protect the customers that use our markets every day. And these safeguards will help ensure that customers who trust their sensitive data to CFTC registered entities can sleep well at night knowing that measures are being taken to protect that information. Such measures are especially critical as our derivatives markets become increasingly data-driven. So I'd now like to invite my fellow commissioners to add any remarks that they'd wish to make. So let's start this time with Commissioner Berkovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We looked into, why are we doing this rule, and we tried to look back at the regulatory history of this, and the preamble to the 2011 amendment, which added swap dealers as a result of Dodd-Frank, does not address why the text was deleted back in 2011. So it looks like, best we can gather, it was an inadvertent deletion of the text that we're adding back in today. The text, as you've noted, provides guidance. It restores the guidance to registrants on what to include in certain policies and procedures consistent with the statutory requirements. Correcting mistakes is good government, so I'm going to support this rule.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Stump?
I'm supportive of advancing the rule, and I have nothing else to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Benham?
No comment.
And Commissioner Quinten.
I'd like to thank you for your leadership, Mr. Chairman, and the staff for their hard work on this issue, and also just recognize the ongoing efforts of both the Chairman and Commissioner Stump in the data protection effort that's ongoing. I think all of the incremental steps we can take to ensure that our registrants' information is secured are very vital. Thank you.
Terrific. Well, are the commissioners prepared to vote? Everyone's nodding their heads yes, so Mr. Kirkpatrick, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The motion now before the Commission is on the approval of the issuance of the proposed amendment to the Customer Information and Records Rule in Regulation 160.30. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkovitz votes aye. Commissioner Stump.
Aye.
Commissioner Stump votes aye. Commissioner Benham.
Aye.
Commissioner Benham votes aye. Commissioner Quintens.
Aye.
Commissioner Quintens votes aye. Chairman Tarbert.
Aye.
Chairman Tarbert votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this matter, the ayes have 5, the noes have 0.
Thank you very much. The ayes have it, and the motion to issue the proposed rule is hereby approved. I'll now entertain a motion to approve, in this case by a series of separate votes, the proposed orders of Foreign Board of Trade registration for Euronext Amsterdam, Euronext Paris, and the European Energy Exchange, respectively.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. So all of these applications are related. We're going to discuss them together, but each application will be subject to a separate vote by the Commission. I'll begin by summarizing the issue and sharing my views, and then again, I'll ask my fellow commissioners to add any remarks they may have. So Euronext Amsterdam, Euronext Paris, and the European Energy Exchange have applied to become registered foreign boards of trade pursuant to Section 4B1 of the Commodity Exchange Act and Part 48 of our regulations. Registration status would allow the applicants to offer direct access to their electronic trading systems to members and participants located here in the United States. It will also allow them to make eligible derivatives contracts available for trading from the United States. Part 48 requires foreign boards of trade and their clearing organizations to satisfy some very important requirements. In particular, Part 48 requires a determination that the Foreign Board of Trade and its clearing organization are subject to comprehensive supervision and regulation by appropriate home country regulators. That is comparable, and that's the key word, comparable to the regulatory regime for our designated contract markets. All three applicants have worked diligently with Commission staff to demonstrate regulatory comparability. In addition, all three applicants have credibly represented that the derivatives contracts they offer are not readily susceptible to manipulation. Each of the three applicants currently holds no action relief that would actually be formalized upon approval of their applications by the Commission. So let me just briefly highlight the three exchanges that have applied to us for the Foreign Board of Trade registration. So first up is Euronext Amsterdam. It's organized in the Netherlands. It operates a market licensed by the Dutch Ministry of Finance, and it is subject to the European Securities and Markets Authority, ESMA, their technical standards. One of the things that staff looked at was that Euronext Amsterdam requires all members to meet fitness and financial soundness requirements. The exchange also employs a well-known trade matching system that complies with the relevant IOSCO principles that we've all agreed to at the international level. And the exchange clears its trades through LCH, which is actually a registered derivatives clearing organization under CFTC rules. The second exchange is Euronext Paris. That's obviously organized in France. It's subject to regulation by the French financial regulators, and it's governed by France's monetary and financial code. Like the previous clearinghouse, it's also subject to ESMA technical standards. And when looking at this application, we took note that, the staff took note that it also uses a well-known trade matching system that is in compliant with the governing IOSCO principles. It also maintains appropriate tools to detect, investigate, and address regulatory violations. And this clearinghouse also clears through LCH, which again is registered and supervised by us. The final clearinghouse is based in Germany, and that's the European Energy Exchange, EEX. It operates a trading platform for a wide variety of energy and agricultural contracts. It's regulated by German authorities, including the Saxon State Ministry for Economic Affairs. And when the staff looked at its application, staff took note that EEX clears trades through the European Commodity Clearing. So this is not a DCO, but it is a licensed central counterparty under the German Banking Act. The exchange is subject to internal fitness and financial soundness requirements for it and its members. And its automated trading system is provided by Eurex Deutschland's trading platform, which also incorporates those IOSCO principles that I had noted before. I'm going to share my views now. I support approving these applications for each of the three applicants. I believe this promotes vibrant derivatives markets and expands the liquidity available for trading and hedging. The Foreign Board of Trade regulatory regime hinges on deference to home regulators. And as each member of this commission expressed during our last open meeting on October 16th, comedy is a two-way street. I support the applications as a sign of our good faith and continuing commitment to negotiate with the European Commission and ESMA regarding EMIR 2.2. I want to specifically point out that language has been added to each registration order, clarifying the CFTC's ability to revoke registration should we have concerns about material changes in the applicable regulatory regimes. Material changes can include developments related to international comedy. Now, it's my hope that such a revocation will never be necessary. Comedy is important because EMIR 2.2 could result in one or more U.S. CCPs being designated as systemically important to the European Union. And in my view, such a designation could create systemic risk for our own financial system. Signs of lack of comedy or deference may prompt additional reviews or exemptions and relief, similar to our review of margin relief for the European Stability Mechanism last month. So I can tell you that we are taking any potential concerns about systemic risk to the European Union very seriously, and we are looking at measures that unilaterally the CFTC could potentially employ to address such alleged instances of systemic risk. So I can tell you one of those areas we're looking carefully at right now is the practice of posting European sovereign debt and euro cash as collateral to CCPs. So you may hear more about that in the weeks to come. But nonetheless, I hope that recent positive conversations and signs with our European counterparts will continue, and I would now like to invite my fellow commissioners to add any remarks they would like to make. So we'll start with Commissioner Quintens first. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the staff for their hard work on these registration applications, as well as the dialogue that these exchanges have had with the agency to promote their applications. I do have a statement I'd like to read. Today, the Commission is considering whether to formally register as FBOT's 3 prominent European futures exchanges. As the Chairman said, Euronext Amsterdam, Euronext Paris, and the European Energy Exchange. All of these exchanges have been permitted to directly access the U.S. market for many years under staff no-action relief. Both the Commission's previous policy of granting no-action relief and the current policy of registering foreign exchanges as FBOTs are premised on a policy of deference to foreign regulatory regimes. The Commission assesses whether foreign exchanges are regulated comparably to how the CFTC supervises U.S. designated contract markets, DCMs, and if so, permits the exchange to access U.S. markets without complying with the Commission's DCM regulations or being subject to regularly scheduled CFTC examinations. This policy efficiently promotes cross-border markets and rationally focuses the Commission's supervisory resources on U.S. exchanges. Now, let me say, while I do not disagree with the substance of granting these exchanges permanent status as registered FBOTs, I do disagree with the timing of today's move by the Commission to finalize and formalize the status of these 3 European exchanges as registered FBOTs. Last month, in dissenting to the Commission's proposed exclusion for the European Stability Mechanism from the Commission's margin requirements for uncleared swaps, I reiterated my approach to our current regulatory relationship with our European counterparts. In light of their refusal to stand by or reaffirm their 2016 commitments in the CFTC's and European Commission's CCP equivalence agreement. Specifically, in my opinion, the absence of that agreement's reaffirmation during the discussion and passage of EMIR 2.2 directly implied the agreement's abrogation by that legislation. While the possibility still exists for a successful cross-border regulatory outcome to EMIR 2.2 that fully respects the CFTC's ultimate authority over U.S. CCPs, still no assurance has been given to remove that doubt. However, unlike at our last open meeting, today's vote is not on a proposal, but on multiple final formal registrations. Let me say that while I believe that the Chairman and all of my fellow commissioners are just as committed to a satisfactory resolution to this cross-border discussion with the EU as I am, I do question whether or not we should act on these final registrations today, and under what conditions the decision will be made to reconsider that status should our discussion with the EU not conclude productively. FBOT registrations depend on the CFTC's trust in our foreign regulatory counterparts. Such trust, in my opinion, continues to be misplaced until the EU can provide us assurances that the CFTC, EC, CCP agreement will be upheld. I therefore am going to dissent from all of today's actions to register these exchanges as FBOTs, and I thank the Chairman for his time.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Quintens. Commissioner Benham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you bringing up these matters before us today. I think I'll be brief, but essentially reiterating what I said, and Commissioner Quinten's brought up last month's meeting regarding the European Stability Mechanism. I think it's important that we, as a commission and individually, but as a group, demonstrate our willingness to work with our foreign counterparts and work within the boundaries of international comity to make our markets the most liquid, the safest, and the most transparent possible. I do think this is a good step forward in demonstrating to our European counterparts that, as we have in the past, we will continue to be willing to work with our friends and our counterparts across the globe, and to demonstrate our trust in their abilities and their requirements as regulators, and the needed respect of our jurisdiction and the constituents and the market participants that we oversee. With that, as you and I have discussed, my understanding and my expectation is that if matters don't proceed as we hope and plan in Europe or otherwise, we will take action as needed and as necessary to make sure that folks understand that this is, in fact, like you suggest, a two-way street, one where reciprocity needs to be matched and appreciated on both sides. So I look forward to supporting the three matters today, but certainly look forward to a continued conversation on international comity and our relationship with our foreign counterparts.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Benham. Commissioner Stump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support the three orders of registration before us today, and I wanted to thank the Division of Market Oversight and the General Counsel's Office for working with my team on incorporating some comments that we had relative to these particular orders. The CFTC's treatment of foreign boards of trade is perhaps our greatest example of how we have had a successful dialogue and working relationship with foreign global jurisdictional regulators over a course of a number of years. And I think that this meeting provides a great opportunity for us to highlight that. Unfortunately, recent finger-pointing as to which jurisdiction is to blame for the less than deferential treatment of global clearinghouses has resulted in the overlooking of the fact that we have a history of working across jurisdictions. The CFTC in particular has a long history of being differential. For anyone who's come to these discussions more recently, you might be left unaware that that is in fact the case. So I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion more publicly. I respect that we're all struggling with how we move forward with regard to the clearinghouses, but I didn't want the opportunity to pass us by to highlight the successes of the Foreign Board of Trade regime that the CFTC has. So if you'll bear with me, I think that it warrants a bit of a history lesson. I'll be as brief as possible because it's a long history, but beginning with our governing statute, Congress in sections 4A and 4B of the Commodity Exchange Act authorized the CFTC to adopt rules governing foreign futures and options, but then explicitly prohibited the CFTC from applying such rules in a prescriptive manner. Later, as electronic trading changed the futures market structure, FBOTs that had developed the capability to provide electronic access asked the CFTC to clarify and confirm that they could do so without having to submit to regulations as designated contract markets in the U.S. Mindful of Congress's mandate not to interfere in the operations of foreign trading platforms, the CFTC responded in the mid-1990s with a series of no-action letters. In further testament to the dynamic nature of our market infrastructure, by the mid-2000s, a Foreign Board of Trade that had received no-action relief from the CFTC notified the CFTC that they intended to list contracts whose settlement prices were based upon contracts traded on CFTC-regulated DCMs. This led the agency in 2006 to issue a policy statement observing, and I quote, that in a global market environment that is developed for the derivatives contracts trading, conduct that takes place on markets located outside the United States may have an impact on U.S. futures and cash markets, as well as the members and users of those markets. Nevertheless, the CFTC did not react to these market developments by moving to impose U.S. regulations on foreign boards of trade, did not abandon its historic deferential approach regarding foreign boards of trade. Rather, took measures to carefully calibrate to assure that the developments in the foreign jurisdictions did not adversely affect the CFTC's ability to carry out its own regulatory responsibilities, and noted that the no-action process was, and I quote again, based upon a review of and ongoing reliance upon the foreign market's home regulatory regime, and was designed to maintain regulatory protections while avoiding the implication of duplicative regulation. After the financial crisis, the Dodd-Frank Act further amended the Commodity Exchange Act to permit the CFTC to require foreign boards of trade to be registered. Congress did not, however, impose prescriptive requirements, but rather reiterated that the CFTC shall consider whether any foreign board of trade is subject to comparable, comprehensive supervision and regulation by the appropriate governmental authority in the FBOT's home country. I would note that it is no accident that this verbiage is similar to language included elsewhere in the Dodd-Frank Act, permitting the CFTC to exempt comparably and comprehensive regulated derivatives clearing organizations and swap execution facilities, further advancing the notion of international deference. So this brings us to the CFTC's Efrat registration rules, which apply to the 3 registration applications before us today. In keeping with our experience of recognizing the benefit of comparable, comprehensively regulated jurisdictions, the registration rules do not stray terribly far from the agency's historic no-action relief process and are wholly consistent with the approach it has taken with regard to FBOTs throughout history. The deference that has historically characterized and that continues to characterize the CFTC's approach to foreign boards of trade is a demonstration of international comity, an expression of mutual respect for the important interest of foreign sovereigns and for international regulatory colleagues overseeing well-regulated trading platforms and clearinghouses. This fact is often missing from the current public debate, and I am pleased that today's meeting provided the opportunity to remind our colleagues abroad that the CFTC has long been a leader in offering deference, and I hope that that would be reciprocated as we move forward in our conversations regarding global clearinghouses.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Stump. That was really helpful, a lesson in our history on the FBOT front. I really appreciate that. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure whether it's better to go first or better to go last. I guess if I go first, nobody has said what I'm going to say. If I get to go last, I'm repeating what other people have said, but then I get to add and respond. So I guess I'll do both. I'll repeat some of what's been said and then add. I think all my colleagues have expressed very pertinent and relevant views as to how to proceed with the situation that we're faced. And I agree with virtually everything that's been said previously. I have a prepared statement. I'm going to read that very briefly and then just add another couple of remarks based on the discussion. I think that's the purpose of the discussion, where hopefully we just don't sit and read prepared statements. We actually engage in discussion. So I'm going to venture into that territory and engaging in some discussion. But let me read my prepared remarks first. Mr. Chairman, you and others have explained the background for the registration of these FBOTs, so I won't repeat that. I will note, once registered, an FBOT can offer its products directly into the U.S. markets without having to register as a designated contract market and without having to clear through a registered derivatives clearing organization. These valuable commercial benefits, as my colleagues have noted, are a direct result of the Commission's ability to rely on the comparable and comprehensive regulation of overseas exchanges and clearing organizations in their home countries. The orders of registration for EEX, Euronext Amsterdam, and Euronext Paris include important references to international comity. In each order, the Commission reserves the right to, quote, condition, modify, suspend, terminate, or otherwise restrict, unquote, the order based on any material changes in the applicable regulatory regimes, including developments related to international comedy. As the Commission discussed during its consideration of a proposed rule to exclude the European Stability Mechanism from the definition of financial end user in the Commission's margin regulations, comedy is a two-way street. Reciprocal respect for the interests of other sovereigns is an important factor in establishing comedy and is a critical feature in ensuring harmonious regulation of entities operating across borders and jurisdictions. I am pleased that the Commission has emphasized comedy in today's orders, and I encourage it to continue conditioning future grants of regulatory benefits for foreign entities on reciprocal treatment for U.S. firms operating overseas. The Commission's regulatory regime recognizes the value of comedy amongst regulators in the successful operation of modern global derivative markets. In the case of FBOTs, the Commission acknowledges the importance of comedy through a willingness to rely on comparable and comprehensive regulation of overseas exchanges and clearing organizations by foreign regulators. A lack of reciprocity could call into question whether a foreign regulatory regime is in fact comparable to the Commission's framework for markets and market participants in the United States. All stakeholders should continue working to preserve comedy and its role in advancing well-regulated derivative markets through the world. I thank my fellow commissioners, and particularly the staff of Division of Market and Oversight and the Office of General Counsel, and working with my counsels to get this language exactly right. I know that it's a delicate issue, and I appreciate all the hard work. I'd just like to add, we don't know, we have this controversy right now on the recognition of clearinghouses, and we need to hopefully make progress on that and uphold the 2016 agreement. We don't know what the future holds in this regard. We don't know what the future reciprocal treatment of U.S. jurisdictions and U.S. entities. Hopefully it will go well. Hopefully the long history this agency has had and our regulators and the success over actually decades we've had in developing a harmonious global framework. Yes, there's glitches we've worked through. Hopefully we'll continue to work through these issues and reach a satisfactory resolution. We just don't know, though. So we need the optionality, to use a term that we're familiar with over here. We need the optionality to respond appropriately. I view today's action and the action we did on the European Stability Mechanism and hopefully future actions as providing us with that optionality so we may respond as appropriate. Also, I appreciated Commissioner Stump's excellent legislative history, and I want to add one item to that in that I was here I was working in the Senate at the time of the FBOT issue came up prior to Dodd-Frank, and then I was here while Congress considered the FBOT provision that's actually in Dodd-Frank and present for some of the debates. There's actually a threshold question to this whole thing is, what's a foreign board of trade? If you put a terminal in the United States, and this is what the Cftc was grappling with 2006, 2000 timeframe, what's a foreign board of trade? If somebody puts a terminal with direct access in New York or any other city, and you can click on your screen and do a trade, is that a foreign board of trade or is that a U.S. board of trade? I mean, there was a view that was expressed, it didn't make it into the final legislation, that if somebody puts a terminal and you can complete a trade from New York, you're a U.S. designated contract market. And by the way, the exchange may be in London, but what happens if its servers are somewhere in the United States? Maybe it's just the corporate thing is in some foreign jurisdiction. So the language that's in the statute really reflects competing considerations such as that. And if we're going to have a workable global system, we could have taken the maximal jurisdictional position and said, if you put a terminal in the United States and a trader in the U.S. can do a trade, you're a U.S. designated contract market, and we could have had territorial jurisdiction. But what we said is, look, you know, we're a member, Congress in its wisdom said, we're a member of the world community, and we want to be able to have our exchanges put terminals in Europe without them being necessarily European exchanges, and so we're going to allow people to have terminals in the United States without necessarily them becoming U.S. exchanges. But we're going to be able to recognize and rely on that foreign jurisdictional regime to primarily regulate that entity as long as it's comparable and comprehensive, and there's no additional risk to U.S. participants or U.S. markets by doing it this way. So really the comparable and comprehensive aspect of this is critical to our being able to rely and to establish this and not do an entire territorial grab here or territorial jurisdictional assertion. If it's not comparable, it's not comprehensive, one could very easily argue we should have full regulatory authority of that if you're putting a terminal in the United States with direct access. We've crossed that bridge. We've made a lot of progress. We don't need to go back there. But if on the other side there's not reciprocal recognition, and if other jurisdictions are going to say, well, just because you're in our jurisdiction, we're exercising maximal jurisdiction of our own over you, I think the whole system breaks down. So I think looking at the legislative history and the history of how we got where we are and how we've made all the progress that we have is critically important. So thank you, and that concludes my remarks for the moment.
Thank you, and I think that's, I just want to comment to sort of start a discussion that it needs to be comparable and comprehensive as sort of an initial threshold. But then after that, I think it's incumbent upon this commission to also recognize reciprocity. So being comparable and comprehensive is the first step, but if it's not a two-way street, then I'm not sure we should be in the business of granting that deference. Nor would we grant deference necessarily in a situation where some foreign jurisdiction happily says, well, we'll grant deference in return, but they don't have a comparable and comprehensive system, because then we can't necessarily trust that jurisdiction. So both sets of elements, I think, need to be there. I don't know what you guys think, but I will.
Absolutely. Comparable and comprehensive. And I think that's the significance of what we're doing, and I appreciate your leadership and the staff's work to actually implement that. That comparable and comprehensive isn't just the technical regulations, but it includes this concept of reciprocity, that it's not comparable if they're not operating under the same principles of international comedy and they're not providing deference or recognition to our regulatory regime in the same way we recognize theirs.
I would just note, I know I keep going back to this history thing, but there was a conversation when Dodd-Frank was being developed about just this. If the statute made it so prescriptive that there was not a willingness to defer, would there be retaliation from other jurisdictions? This was a conversation that was being had in 2010 relative to the way the Foreign Board of Trade language ended up in Dodd-Frank. And so I think it is only fitting that this conversation is now being had relative to so many other things, that we acknowledged 10 years ago that these are global markets, and we had great relations. We like to have good relationships with our fellow regulators, and we don't necessarily want to have a situation that results in retaliation. But unfortunately, if only left with retaliation because there's a lack of willingness to reciprocate, that is something that we have to consider. So.
Okay, well, fantastic. Well, really appreciated that robust discussion. So on that note, I will now ask, are the commissioners prepared to vote on each of the 3 Foreign Board of Trade registration applications? Okay, so I would ask Mr. Kirkpatrick, will you call the roll for each of the applications?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first part of the motion now before the Commission is on the approval of the Order of Foreign Board of Trade registration for Euronext Amsterdam. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkovitz votes aye. Commissioner Stump.
Aye.
Commissioner Stump votes aye. Commissioner Benham.
Aye.
Commissioner Benham votes aye. Commissioner Quintens.
No.
Commissioner Quintens votes no. Chairman Tarbert.
Aye.
Chairman Tarbert votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this part of the motion pertaining to Euronext Amsterdam, the ayes have 4, the noes have 1.
Thank you very much. The ayes have it, and the motion as to the approval of Euronext Amsterdam is adopted by the Commission.
The second part of the motion, now before the Commission, is on the approval of the Order of Foreign Board of Trade registration for Euronext Paris. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkovitz votes aye. Commissioner Stump.
Aye.
Commissioner Stump votes aye. Commissioner Benham.
Aye.
Commissioner Benham votes aye. Commissioner Quintens.
No.
Commissioner Quintens votes no. Chairman Tarbert.
Aye.
Chairman Tarbert votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this part of the motion pertaining to Euronext Paris, the ayes have 4, the noes have 1.
Thank you. The ayes have it, and the motion as to Euronext Paris, its application is adopted by the Commission.
The final part of the motion, now before the Commission, is on the approval of the Order of Foreign Board of Trade registration for the European Energy Exchange. Commissioner Berkovitz.
Aye.
Commissioner Berkovitz votes aye. Commissioner Stump.
Aye.
Commissioner Stump votes aye. Commissioner Benham.
Aye.
Commissioner Benham votes aye. Commissioner Quintens.
No.
Commissioner Quintens votes no. Chairman Tarbert.
Aye.
Chairman Tarbert votes aye. Mr. Chairman, on this part of the motion pertaining to the European Energy Exchange, the ayes have 4, the noes have 1.
Thank you very much. The ayes have it, and the motion as to the approval of the application by the European Energy Exchange is hereby adopted by the Commission. Well, our sort of rulemaking and policy business now behind us, now we will proceed to the third agenda item, which is the signing of the Veterans Affinity Group Charter. So if members of the group could please join Tony Thompson and Sarah Somerville in the front of the dais, we will proceed to the signing of the charter.
Yeah, why don't you guys come down too?
And if my fellow commissioners could join me as well. Come on, please. Maybe we could have the commissioners on that side. Yeah. We're standing, I think. Well, our nation's veterans are an invaluable part of the fabric of this great country. Since the American Revolution, tens of millions of Americans have served our country in uniform. As we approach Veterans Day, we're reminded that we're all forever indebted to them for their service and sacrifice. Today, there are approximately 20 million veterans living in the United States. Now, we at the CFTC are proud to call more than 50 of them, a bunch of them that are now standing before us, our fellow colleagues. They serve at every level of our organization, including as members of our executive leadership team. I'm proud that the CFTC will now recognize their contributions by launching our first ever Veterans Affinity Group. The primary purpose of our CFTC affinity groups is to assist the Commission in promoting and fostering a diverse workplace. These groups are a valuable mechanism to build an inclusive culture by offering leadership and professional development opportunities and access to programs and activities aligned with the CFTC's shared vision of becoming the global standard for sound derivatives regulation. The inception of the agency's Veterans Affinity Group is a salute to all who have served. I want to extend my deepest thanks to the following individuals for their hard work and offices for making this a reality. First, my fellow commissioners and their staffs, Sarah Somerville and the Office of Minority and Women Inclusion, which oversees all 6 of our affinity groups, and Executive Director Tony Thompson and his team. Tony, in fact, is a retired Air Force colonel. He served in uniform for 32 years, and I'm proud to say that Tony has been elected by the group's members as the first Veterans Affinity Group chair. So congratulations, Tony, and now Tony and Sarah will sign the charter. And maybe if I could have the commission members, 2 on this side, 2 on that side together, or maybe we'll all stand behind. Fantastic. Congratulations. to all the members of the Affinity Group, and again, thank you very much for your service and dedication, not only to our country during your service, but also now to the CFTC. So thank you all, and congratulations. Look forward to meetings of the Affinity Group. So if the commissioners could go back to the dais. So we have made it through all three of our agenda items in less than an hour. But I'd like to ask my fellow commissioners, is there any other business? Okay, there being no further business, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, those in favor of adjourning the meeting will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, the ayes have it. And I am grateful to the CFTC staff once again for your great work. I want to once again congratulate everyone in the Veterans Affinity Group. And I want to say the meeting is hereby adjourned. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.